We're on. Hopefully we're on. Are we on?
Are we on?
Oh, anyway. Welcome everybody online. We've got a very small crowd here at the Lord Newry Hotel, but that's good. Nobody's sharing any germs. And this is John. We're doing our elbow bump and social distancing. And I've got my little notebook, my diary, because I'm old and I always have to have a paper diary. And we're going to start off.
And I'm even older.
Can't read it. But we're going to start off by talking about, we were talking about some of the barriers and the facilitators to schools adopting a synthetic phonics approach.
Right.
We'll probably occasionally have the door open and more people come in. Welcome. So if you could talk about what you think works in the UK to make people keen to adopt synthetic phonics approaches in the early years.
Right. Certainly, I think one of the most important things really is for teachers to gain really top-notch professional knowledge what they're doing. Rob Coe, one of the researchers in the UK, is a really strong advocate for this, and so of course it's Hattie are telling us that people really need to know their subject. If you don't know your subject, then clearly you're going to find it difficult to be able to teach somebody and know what the progression is from simple to more complex. So that would seem to me to be a sine qua non, really, absolutely essential. I think the second thing is that people need to look at the Rose Report again and see what Jim Rose had to say when he was commissioned by the British government to do this report in 2006, and when he did report, the strongest piece of advice he had was pick a program, stick to it, make sure you do it with absolute fidelity. Because if you don't and you start mixing things up, you don't know what works and what doesn't work. So it seems to me that that's incredibly important too. In school after school after school that we see in UK, where they've got a really enthusiastic, what we would call a phonics champion, somebody who takes it, by the scruff of the neck, inspires other people, goes around making sure that people are teaching with fidelity to whatever the program is, that seems to make a huge difference actually. And through those people as well, they're doing things like getting people to video themselves when they're teaching to make sure that they're sticking to what it is they're supposed to be doing. They're offering peer observation, they're joining together to help plan lessons and talk about whatever it is they're teaching. And actually, again, in the best schools, they do this at the beginning of every term. They talk about what it is we're going to do and probably pull out many of the central points, I think.
So that champion person, does that need to be one of the foundation teachers, or can that be, I'm a speech pathologist, I don't teach classes of young children, but I've read about the research on it, but how does somebody who isn't an actual classroom teacher facilitate that? Well, maybe that's not possible, maybe it does need to come from the teachers themselves.
Yeah, I think so. Although actually there are special needs teachers who are, who are terrifically enthusiastic and help to drive this. But generally speaking, I would say that it's an early years person. And the reason why it's an early years person is because actually early years people know phonics much better than what we call Key Stage 2 or years 3 to 6. They have a much better phonics knowledge. And this is changing practice in the UK. What we're finding is that many head teachers or principals, as you call them here, are asking people in those years from 3 to 6 to move down for a year or two into the early years, particularly year 1 and year 2, to find out more and to really polish their practice. And it's having it's making an amazing difference really.
And do you think that the teachers in the upper end of the school are saying to the early years teachers, we don't want to be doing the big differentiation workload that is involved when kids have got really disparate skills in the upper end of the school. We've got to, we're heading into the kind of high school mode where you've got a curriculum to deliver, and if the kids are not able to read and write well, then that's going to make my life a lot harder. if I'm a grade 5 teacher and I'm trying to deliver a whole lot of content. So I always imagine that other primary school teachers and secondary teachers would put a lot of pressure on early years teachers to really get those kids over the line.
Absolutely.
In terms of their code skills.
No, that's right. I think that's dead right. Although I think it still has enormous relevance actually for those teachers years 3 to 6 and even secondary teachers, because of course once the knowledge that they're teaching becomes domain specific, the words get longer, they contain less frequently encountered spellings and in fact less frequently encountered words, then actually teacher knowledge is again really important. But instead of teaching it for half an hour a day, as you'd expect in the early years, what they do is teach it more tangentially. So this word's come up today, you know, polyhedron, whatever, and actually if children, they're able to spot if children are having trouble spelling it or even reading it, and they're able to pull it apart, they know exactly what to do. And I think actually we're beginning to persuade people that this is part and parcel of their job too. Of course, it's been a long struggle, and it certainly isn't universal across England, I can tell you, because you see all sorts of bad practice. People say to us all the time, oh my goodness, you've been going with synthetic phonics now in Britain for ages, and we'd expect everybody to be doing it. Well, of course, the government mandates it, but that doesn't mean that it's done. There are many schools in which you still find, very poor practice.
Yeah, and the universities have, because I know that here I get exasperated reading out the website of the education department that has, you know, sort of a bit of phonics plus a whole lot of other stuff that doesn't necessarily make any sense when you think about how it all works in the sequence from my perspective. And then the universities very much, not really pushing for teachers to know about phonology, to know about morphology, to really understand the spoken language. Is that the same problem in?
Exactly the same. You find there's hardly a teaching institution, churning out teachers that is, that really pay any attention to this. In fact, at one time I was working in teacher training and worked for a university, and actually my background is more literature really, and that's what it was some time ago. So I used to have to go into schools and watch people teaching Shakespeare, Macbeth and all that sort of thing. One day I listened to a lecturer bring the early years people into the library, and he said, those are the books on phonics over there, and that's whole language, so when you get into the school, do whatever they do. And that was it. That was the sum total of their introduction to
and I think a lot of it stems from shallow knowledge. You know. When we have the corona shutdown, I'm going to do a phonology for teachers online. Think about the inside of your mouth. The many things we're going to have to do with this shutdown.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
One of the things I'd like to know is that we hardly ever see speech therapists in schools in UK.
I used to work there, and I used to in a setting where sometimes I would see children 3 times a week, but I think we were very well resourced where I was in Carroll and the Boom.
Right. Well, I think a lot of that funding has dried up, and you don't see so many of them these days unless a child's need is very great, and then they might get them in for a child, you know, but you certainly don't see them very often. So really, what I want to know from you is what business do you have teaching these young kids phonics?
That's
Surely it's a job
true.
of the teachers.
Yeah, I don't want to tell teachers how to do their job. I just don't want to have the instructional casualties. You know, I mean, the funny thing is, being in private practice, it's actually a benefit to me to have a lot of instructional casualties. You know, you turn them around, families are happy, whatever. But I just think these are children. And, you know, we need to prevent the casualties when we can. When you talk to, especially I remember working in a school where there were quite a few kids who were struggling, and then I'd gradually, you know, you have this problem where you get more and more kids referred to you for your little group. Can you squeeze another one in? What about squeezing this one in? What did you do with that kid? Can you do it with that kid? Then, you know, the teachers were tremendously interested in, even though the philosophy of the school was not supportive of doing much in the way of phonics, but the teachers were tremendously interested in how it would work, and they were always kind of cornering me in the hallway or asking me to have a look at something of mine, you know. So I think that there's a real willingness among teachers to work in a team and to learn from each other. I mean, obviously the crowd control that that prep teachers have is a stunning thing to behold to a school like me. They would have run amok if I was in charge. And so I guess it's about bringing the expertise that you've got and respecting the expertise that other people have got and trying to build a good system. And I think schools now are hiring, there seem to be quite a lot of schools that are hiring their own speech pathologists rather than just the department ones going in who are often just very assessment focused or don't do much in terms of intervention. So I think that's a promising sign. A lot of schools now, I had a school asking me recently, can I provide a couple of days of therapy? Because they've sort of realised that they don't have the linguistic expertise that's needed. So, does that answer the question? I know.
Sure.
It's not my business really, but...
I mean, it goes, obviously, touching on the problem, it's...
But I think also, I get, my website is this crazy thing that I set up when I had a little bit of spare time when I was cranking out my private practice. And I've had so many teachers, they've had 6.5 million hits on that website now since 2012.
Yeah.
It's been a stupidly, I don't know how, amazing, explosive success, I suppose, according to my friends' kids who know about technology. They go, really, 6.5 million hits? But it's because there's, I think, an appetite for it, and it's among teachers as well as among parents and others.
Yeah, no, there's a huge need for the kind of knowledge that you're putting across on your website. I know.
And I think that a lot of academic stuff, it's very good, but it's quite dry, and people need a much more sort of narrative-driven. Very often, it's much better to be able to communicate it in a more sort of folksy, narrative-y way to really get the message across, and say it a few times. Journal articles, I have them on my desk. I read them, but oh my goodness. I wish someone would just say it in plain English to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's often the problem. I think, the academics can talk. I'm not sure they talk the talk really, because most of them don't teach kids. And it seems, I'm always looking at stuff produced by academics and I'm thinking, okay, try that in the classroom and see what happens, because I know what's going to happen. You're going to go crash up against the wall of kids' understanding and kids' abilities, That's the problem. So really, when I talk to people, I try and talk and put this into a concrete setting so that people can see what we mean by the kind of practice that we're offering.
Yeah. And as part of that, that when you're an expert, you don't know you're an expert. There's a proper term for it. But once you know how to read and spell, you forget that it was hard to learn. And you forget
curse of expertise.
Curse of expertise. Curse of expertise. That kind of stuff. And and winding back, I don't know if you've ever tried writing decodable books, you would have, but trying to wind back your language knowledge and focus on the code. I mean, you're constantly wanting to write an interesting story, and you've got to stop yourself from using that word and that word and that word. It's the cognitive load is really high to be able to do that well. People don't really appreciate that those little tiny steps, being able to set them up. So that all the kids can do it.
Yeah, and it's really damn hard to write them as well, especially in the very, very early stages, isn't it? As you said the other day, actually, have we exhausted all the books that we can write without plagiarising?
It's Matt and Tam.
That's it, Tam and Sam.
Pin. How many things can you say about a pin? Anyway, but it's fresh to the kids. That's the thing. They haven't read that book 100 times, because we all have.
Yeah.
We're kind of bored with it. But that's not it's not for my entertainment. I was going to ask you about this. We were talking about this schema thing of, you were talking about teacher knowledge.
Right.
And what if you say to a teacher, I remember there's this lovely teacher that I know, and I said to her a few years ago, so how are you going to teach your early literacy? How are you going to teach your early literacy kids in the prep centre coming in this year? And she said, we'll do, golden words, we'll do the alphabet, and we'll do the, PM readers, and we'll do, the sorts of things that are being used in schools a lot. But it seemed to me, but I couldn't kind of articulate it then, that what she really needed was a different schema about how kids learn to read in order to choose resources that are going to dovetail more effectively and get more success. And I'm happy to report that she has now done that, and her kids, so 20% of them were achieving at benchmark, and now 80% of them are, which is beautiful. But that thing of what you think is happening when kids are learning to read, that schema thing.
Well, I'm going to give you a slightly long-winded answer. I'm sorry, but do stop me if you think I'm going on too long. But for us, the starting point, of course, is what you learn naturally and what has been invented and is really secondary learning, if you like. And the person really who's written most about this has been a chap called David Geary, who is a psychologist, but he made this distinction. I think it's an incredibly useful distinction because what we learn to do is we learn to speak and we learn to listen. All kids everywhere, all over the world, learn to speak and listen, unless, of course, there's something drastically wrong with them. What all kids don't do is they don't learn a writing system. And that's why so many communities don't have writing systems. They haven't been invented for those languages yet. Learning a writing system is incredibly hard. And what the people who've written a book, a very nice little book called The World's Writing Systems, say is that no illiterate child learns their own writing script without tuition. And I think that's absolutely true. So where do you start then? So where I'd like to start is I come back to that good old guy Piaget. And Piaget is really sort of out of fashion. But for me, Piaget offers some really important insights. And one of the important insights was that he thought it was incredibly important to build a schema, that you build from simple and you build on top of the simple more complex bits step by step. And that's what we try and do for a start in Sounds Right, which is, of course, as you know, my program. And
Did you say that at the start? Sorry.
no, well, I mean, to be honest with you, I'd rather sort of keep it fairly generic because I think there's a way of doing it, and I don't feel the need necessarily to sort of try and breastbeat or anything like that. So I think that one of the things that we are very consciously doing when young children walk into class for the very first time, they're 4 years old in Britain, you know, you only have to be 4 years old on the 31st of August, you can go into class on the 1st of September. Right, and those kids manage perfectly well, and we see it going on all over England. These kids are being taught, and what we start off with really is we start off with this idea that Piaget put forward of accommodation, and accommodation seems to be a great idea. That's coming to grips with an idea that you've never encountered before, if you like. So we show children right from the start that these squiggly things on the board, and now I'm going to segue into Elkinin. You've all heard of Elkinin boxes, but actually Elkinin was a famous Russian psychologist, Daniil Borisovich Elkinin, marvelous guy who invented word building. And we start with word building. The reason why we start with word building is because we're giving children the opportunity. They know what a mat is, they know what sat is, they know what sit is. And we're saying, these are the sounds we need to build mat, or sit, or whatever. Because they know what the word is already, then we've started to teach them, we've started to show them the correspondence between what they hear and what they see. And of course, those of you who do Sounds Right will know that we give them a place to listen by putting lines on the board, and we're also using gestural language all the time, about which actually there's been some very important research recently, mostly coming from a chap called Tomasello. Really interesting stuff. And it shows, and Hattie mentions this in his book, Visible Learning and the Science of How We Learn. He talks about how much more attention people pay to teachers who use gestural language. So we start with these very small building blocks. We go to build on top of that. You're building mat one day, it's sat the next day. So now we've got 4 sound spelling correspondences. We've also got children saying these sounds accurately. We've got children who come into school, they know the letter names. That's M. Actually, M is a letter name. We want the sound. What sound can you hear when I say mat? So we've got children going m, and we're tidying that up as well. And we've got children who've never seen any of this before. So that's what they're learning it for the first time. So we've got everybody accommodating in different ways to what we're doing. And after that then, all the way through, the rest of the one-to-ones apart from cue, it's additive. And this is what Piaget said. And it's really easy to teach stuff when you're just adding on. And I guess from a Piagetian point of view, Piaget said that at first children's understanding is very low resolution. They're using this tool in the world which is very low resolution, and it becomes better and better refined. The resolution improves as they learn more and they start to really understand it, but they start to understand it through the procedural stuff as well. So, of course, we carry on from there. After one-to-ones, double consonants, we increase the complexity of, so they have to accommodate to that. Why is it that I can't read this word? This, because this is 2 letters, but it's 1 sound, and so on. So all the way through then, we're adding and adding, but in slow steps, one after another, until we get to the very most complex polysyllabic words. So in a nutshell, that's what
and also in those different levels of logic. So, you know, you can have 1 letter for 1 sound.
Yeah.
Oh, now there's 2 letters or 3 or 4 letters for 1 sound.
Yeah.
Oh, look, now this sound can be spelled a lot of different ways. So that thing of having the pivot point being the sound and the way it's spelled.
Yeah.
You know, when kids arrive in classrooms, often they've got the letters. I've been looking at a lot of stuff online about what's happening in schools today. It seems to me that the letters are often the starting point, but we have to get really successful, we have to make the sounds the starting point and really wind back kids' attention into their own mouths and their own words, and then try to put those on paper rather than trying to start from the letter. And I think, you know, Diana again has said that a lot, that you're teaching from the wrong end. So you've got to start with the sounds and their spellings, and then gradually add complexity, and then add the different logic. So 4 letters, 1 sound, or many ways to spell 1 sound, or that spelling is shared by a few sounds, OU,
Sure.
it could be cow, it could be oo. Yeah, but having a stepwise thing. I think if you ask, and actually we're going to be very interested in asking the schools around here, you know, when do you teach whatever, IGH as in night?
Yeah.
And if you ask that to a lot of schools, I think often the answer will be, we do it when the kids are ready, or when, you know, there's not a kind of clear sequence and schedule for when that's going to happen.
When they're 15.
No. But you know, I mean, I think people are doing a lot of that teaching, but sometimes there might be, you know, the same diagraph might be taught 3 times and another one might not be taught at all, just because there isn't an established scope and sequence in the school.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But asking the question, what is your established phonics scope and sequence, opens up, you know, the answer of, well, we don't have one, what is that? Or, you know, what are the options, or whatever. And then you can really start to have a conversation about, well, you know, some of them like to teach, you know, based on the shape of the letter, and, you know, the formation of the letter. Some of them like to teach based on whether it's a continuant or not, like yours.
Yes.
My approach has originally been to do developmentally early consonants, because so many of my kids can't say s very well. I want to start with s because they're saying so but as long as you know what that logic is, and you have logic, and you can go through and tick it all off,
Sure.
The sequence is not so important. Well, then you might like to talk about continuance, since you love continuance.
Well, no, I do actually. I do love continuance, simply because, you know, they're sounds that you can really hang on to, and I think really with the lines and with the gestures, then you're giving kids a place to listen, a simple physical locational cue, we call it, and we're using these gestures. You can hang on to the sound as long as you like, and I don't care whether they can't say s, to be honest with you, because there are lots of kids, I don't care whether they can't say the sound. I mean, yes, it might be for some kids, then that might be problematical, because if the input isn't good, then if they can't hear, in other words, then they are going to have problems. But actually, if they can hear, it doesn't matter too much whether they can say it or not, as long as they can recognise that this is s, might not be able to say, but they know which one it is, and that's the important
Well,
thing.
that's right, yeah. So
We
you
had
say-
a chancellor of Oxford University who couldn't say his own name, he couldn't say Roy. His name's Roy Jenkins, and he would persist in saying Roy, but actually got to where he got to, doing very well, not being able to say that, but also being able to spell it perfectly well.
Yeah, dialect, maybe there's dialect.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. And so, yeah, continuing, we should expect, continuance are the sounds that you can,
That you can hang on to, yes. Yeah, that's right. So you can hang on to vet, rat,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth.
but not act.
Yeah, the problem with k is it's there and gone, and for some kids that's too quick. Mind you, having said that, you see, I think that it's getting to know what the game is. So for me, teaching phonics is a game, or a series of games, if you like, that children can really enjoy. And once you know what the game is and how to play it, then away you go. And I think it becomes a lot easier. And then I'm sure that, non-continuous stop sounds, obstruents, I remember. I never knew that word until you taught it me years ago. So,
I got to say that.
yeah, wonderful.
Very good.
And, but yes, I'm sure that they can manage with that. Of course, the real problem comes again, doesn't it, when you get to adjacent consonants. That's the thing.
Yeah, and I think we really underestimate how hard it is for kids to discern, especially those vowel like the and the bring and the, there's so many, we ask them to write bring and they write bing. It's because they can't hear that and hearing especially the triple consonants is, I think we underestimate that. We kind of assume that in some programs it seems to be that especially some decodable books, they really assume that if you know all those sounds, then you'll be able to cope with those.
You can just do it. Yeah.
And it's not the case for the kids I see. Maybe it's the case for more mainstream kids.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, for a significant number of kids, maybe, almost a fifth of kids have some difficulties with those consonant strings. And of course, if you have trouble with those, then when you get into what we call the extended code, some people call it the advanced code and so on, how can you be asked to focus on the fact that you're to learn that this is the way we spell E in stream if you're still having trouble with the S and the T and the at the same time? Actually, what happens is that you get overwhelmed. It's cognitive load again, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And stuff starts to fall off the table of working memory.
Yeah.
It's really as simple as that, which is why letters and sounds was quite wrong actually in making adjacent consonants optional. And they've just revamped it, by the way. I've been sitting, I work for the DFE a little bit as well, so we're sitting around the table and it's been revamped. They're still making the same mistake. It's still in phase 62 or so, phase 5, something that you teach much later. And I think that's a huge mistake. We never made it optional. We said it's absolutely essential to achieve mastery by the time you get to the extended code, really. And even,
And once kids are doing long words, discerning those internal sounds, the classic kid that I see, they read the beginning of the word and the end, and the middle is like a blur, They really don't have that precise ability to listen through the word and think about each part.
McGinnis says that they attend to the outer segments of words.
Yeah, they really do. It starts with that and it ends with that must be such and such, and particularly if they've had some encouragement to look at the picture and guess or whatever.
I have to say I'm a huge Dan McGinnis fan, really. Whenever I'm stuck, I go back to McGinnis, and actually I find that she's got the answers. I think the woman was a genius.
Early reading instruction, she was.
Fantastic. But a fantastic writer as well, as good as Jean Chao. Jean Chao was another one who died some years ago now, but who wrote the reading revolution in the 60s, went through 3 reprints altogether, and she wrote like an angel as well, even though she spoke no English when she arrived in the United States, which is interesting.
There you go.
Anyway.
Cool. We had someone who emailed in about letter names, about the vexed question, the wicked problem of letter names. So I guess saying that in a lot of programs, letter names are used for, particularly in spelling teaching. Mark Seidenberg says you've got to have a name for something. If it's a thing, you've got to have a name for it. But my own experience with, I remember I went to Mexico to learn Spanish, and I could speak it, not anymore. I could speak it, read and write it okay, and get by and have conversations with people beyond just where is the bus stop and, you know, ordering my lunch. And I rang someone one day I was living in London, I rang someone in Spain to book a hotel room, and she said, how do you spell your name? And I went, I don't know, I never learnt the letter names.
Yeah.
So it made me go, you don't actually need to know the letter names to be able to read and write. You need to do it to be able to do anything that's to do with alphabet, or if people are asking you over the phone to spell.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're face to face in, you can write it, or you can, you know.
Or a dictionary maybe as well, you know.
But anyway, letter names.
Yeah.
When would you teach those?
At the end of the first year of doing phonics. When children have a clear understanding of how the code works, once they understand that these squiggles on the whiteboard, on the page, represent the sounds in your speech, the sounds that you're using all the time, that's the time that you can use them. And in fact then, they're useful as a shortcut. So it's pretty easy, I think, to... Where's the whiteboard now? Let's just... Oh, thank you very much.
Here's one I made earlier.
So,
what colour would you like?
Thank you. I always offer the kids the choice of colour as well, they love it.
Go to office choices where you can.
So if you're in the initial code and the child is writing something and they say to you, Miss, it's all Miss, isn't it? But how do you spell stream? I never ever give a kid the spelling, the whole word. What's the difficult bit for you? And because I know the children I'm teaching, I always know the children, which is why we use formative assessment a huge amount. There's no need to test little children all the time. If you're a good teacher, know your stuff, you should know exactly what every kid can do. You should know what their segmenting, blending, phoneme manipulation abilities are. You should know exactly what code they know and where they get a bit stuck every now and then. And you should be targeting where they get stuck and giving them extra practice within the lesson as well. So, but as they get used to writing, we love dictation. We do a lot of dictation, so we're modelling for them writing from the start. And of course, they start to get creative. And my goodness, some of the stuff that they're able to do. So we saw a child, my uncle, they were asked to write about a pet, these children, and some child wrote my, she got the word my from the teacher, uncle, Stephen, bought, you know, and that was my Uncle Stephen bought. They hadn't done or, they hadn't covered that schwa, Stephen, and sound. They haven't covered the way we spell at the ends of words yet. That's all going to be refined later, but the child can write pretty much anything they want. So when they ask you a question, you know how to answer it, you know whether they can have a go at it, you know which part of the word is giving them trouble. So here's an example. A child says to me, how do you spell the word stream? I know that they can blend and segment individual consonants. So I know they know and what's the difficult bit for you? Make them analytical. It's the E. This is the way we spell E. Okay? And that's it. Now later, of course, as soon as things move on a bit, then letter names are useful as a shortcut. You say, it's the EA spelling, and I'll give you an example of our youngest daughter. Our youngest daughter was doing the Egyptians, and one day she shouted from the kitchen, Dad, how do you spell archaeology? So what's the difficult bit for you? Oh, Dad! She knows. Not again. So, well, tell me what the difficult bit is. It's the E, Dad. Archaeology. It's the AE spelling. It's one of those spellings we get from Greek. And again, as you know, talking about how the program works, I am very, very much in favour of teaching children these Greek spellings that we get. So PH, CH, fork, and so on and so forth. And just sensitizing them to, it's one of those Greek words. Oh, all right, I know how you spell the f in this word then, in photo, and so on.
Yeah.
So we move into the territory there, I think, pretty quickly of morphology as well, don't we?
Indeed, and that was another thing I was going to ask you about,
Okay.
because there's been a lot of discussion. I don't know, people hear it probably on the DDOL network, and there's been a fair bit of discussion about this business of teaching morphology. When do you, and how does it fit in with a phonics program? So you've got your new 3 to 6.
But even before that, even in the first 3 years, I'd say that one of the things that I think that people don't bear in mind, so if a child says to me, how do you spell a simple past tense ending, it's ED, unless it's an irregular verb. It's always ED, it doesn't matter how it sounds, it might be id, it might be sh, or it might be d, you know, but actually I'd start teaching those things in year 1. So the year after, the first year, what you call prep or kindy or whatever, and start bringing those things in. If you're adding inflectional morphemes, then of course it's easy to talk about those. We add an S to plurals very often, unless again they're irregular plurals, or to third person singular.
She jumps.
Yeah, she jumps and so on. And I'd be pointing this out to kids, so that's where I think it all begins. And then of course, I mean, I think probably you need to be much more systematic about it, certainly through year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then you need a scope and sequence, and that's what our new course is about. We've developed a scope and sequence for teaching all of this stuff. So,
because a lot of the inflectional morphemes, so we've only got 8 of them, and they're all pretty straightforward spelling. So those ones are in the early part of your program, and then the early part of most programs. I think you can't do much without past tense and and kids come to school knowing how to say those, so there's no issue of teaching them in an oral sense. But then, derivational morphemes, then it's like, can anybody find an exhaustive list of what are all the derivational morphemes are? They keep making up more, bromance and gate as a suffix. That thing of where do you, how many do you take? I mean, there's the obviously really common ones, but then how far do you go? What is it? Is it somebody was emailing me about, is the in impossible? Is that not impossible? I can't remember what the word was. Anyway, some...
Immodest and things like that, that kind of stuff, isn't it?
But there's a lot of things that look like a prefix that aren't, because they used to be a prefix in Latin, but you can't use them productively now. But I think that teachers are poorly let down by the system in terms of knowing all that stuff and having to research. A lot of people seem to be researching it themselves. And
that shouldn't be happening.
It should be happening. It should be part of teacher training to know this is how we build words in English. These are the main ones to teach. Use your scope and sequence. Why do you have to make it all up yourself? Right. It seems like crazy. Anyway,
I can't pretend to have developed this scope and sequence myself, so I relied on the good Dr. Bevan here, who is a language teacher, and I said, if we're going to do this, what are we going to do? And she said, well, look, what's the matter with you people? Don't you realise that actually, if you're teaching a language, that what you do, the first thing you do is find out which are the most common 1,000 words in the language and work from there and then build it up. And actually that seems to be a pretty good starting point for a scope and sequence. So I think that's where we've started, and of course we're bringing in all these derivational morphemes, many of which of course are generative, aren't they, in the sense that you can use them in all sorts of different situations, orthodontist, orthographic, and so on. And kids love it. Kids absolutely love it. They get very excited about this kind of thing, and you can really get, I won't say boys, that's wrong actually. I find boys learn just as well as girls if they're well motivated, but I think all kids can be really well motivated by this kind of stuff.
Like a bit of wordplay, making up new words.
Can I tell you one little story that we went to Carey School in Perth a couple of years ago, and I taught the word rhinoceros, and I did it through word building. So I said, when I say the word rhinoceros, giving them a bit of help, of course, and they built this word pretty well, there's that RH Greek spelling again, But what does it mean? What does rhino mean? What's a rhino? What does that mean in in the word? Well, that's that animal with the horn. No, it doesn't actually. It means something else, and it comes from, and they guessed correctly, it comes from Greek. So what's it mean? It means nose. Oh, wow, that's interesting. Nose. And what do you think seros means? Wouldn't be a horn, would it? Yeah, it would. The animal with the horn on its nose. And this kid went, Triceratops. And kids make these connections in a flash. I mean, it's so exciting, really, to see that kind of thing. So yes, I mean, this is generative, and of course, I think kids, it's all very well to say, that we teach that this is all fun stuff, but actually it does need to be taught systematically. They need to be learning how to break these words into their syllables. And once they've broken words into their syllables, they don't need to talk. We can talk then about the way that they're composed from a morphological point of view and what the meanings of those morphological bits are.
Can you give an example?
Give you an example. Well, orthodontist is a good one in a way. What else do I like? Arthropod. Arthropod's a nice one actually. Arthropods are animals with jointed legs. Pod, Greek, arthro, joint. So arthropod. And in fact, I was talking to my daughter about this one day, and she went, arthritis, of course, inflammation of the joints.
Podiatrist.
From which I suffer quite a lot these days, actually. But
So that, being a word detective kind of thing, like figuring out, oh my goodness, once I know what it means, I can find other words. Chronological, synchronized. There's that cron again. Chronic. Kids really like that. Some kids really like that. And I also, with sorting, where you pick a sound and then you're working on all the spellings, I often, rather than getting the neat little pack of words out of the Sounds Right kit or wherever, I can say to a kid, tell me some words with A in it. And just get them to generate words and sort them, and so it's their words, and I write them down faithfully and get the parent to cut it up. But it doesn't have to,
But that's okay if they understand the thinking.
That's right, and it flushes out those kids who, when you say, tell me a word with the sound A in it, and they say hat, that's cat, that is written with the same letter, but I want sounds with A, like May and day and late, and they can rhyme, then they can start to generate more. But, there's a lot of kids who immediately just go to letters. It takes a long, long time to get them to realise we're talking about a sound rather than a letter.
I only find this in secondary school. I'll never forget a boy I met in a school called Lord Grey in Milton Keynes, and I was asked to see this boy. He's 15 years old, and he just hadn't got out of the traps at all. And as luck would have it, his name was Sam. So I wrote his name down and I said, okay, so tell me the sounds in Sam. Of course, what did he say? S-A-M. S-A-M. I said, listen mate, I can say this, I can say S-A-M until I die, which probably is going to be a bit sooner than you mate, but I'll never get to Sam. So what you need to say is you need to say the sounds. These squiggles represent sounds on the page. Listen, s, a, m. Okay, what can you hear if I say s, a, m? He looked at me. He said, Sam, and I know a number of people, a number of teachers have had that same moment with children, but he was furious, of course, afterwards. Why hasn't anybody ever told me this before? Why have they been teaching me this nonsense, which isn't helpful?
Well, maybe he would, how did he miss that impression?
And do we use... Yeah, that's right. Do we use letter names when we're writing? I don't use letter names. I don't know about you. If I'm writing a complex word, like, okay, I've got a word here for you. I'm going to have to use this. It's a kind of leprosy, okay? It's kind of leprosy. Take it from me, it is, so it's porcibacillary leprosy. So I go porcibacillary. Okay, porcibacillary. There you go, porcibacillary. That's porcibacillary leprosy.
I was going to also ask you about oral only, PA work. Doing, say...
Hegarty.
PT, David Patrick, 1 minute activities. I use those with older kids who I just cannot get them to think about sounds. Unless, while there's letters there, they just think about what it looks like and they don't think about what it sounds like. But with littler ones, I'm inclined to go with the whole business of just do letters and sound manipulation at the same time.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think the research on it is fairly clear actually. The effect sizes on linking it to spellings from the start is, well, unassailable really. I mean, it's also in the 2000 National Report Card and that looked at 30 years of research. So I'm pretty convinced that's the case. But I'm not ideological about this actually, because when our youngest daughter was young and we taught her using Sounds Right, we would play games with sounds like this. So I spy with my little eye something beginning with g. What do you think that is? It's a mug. I'd go and collect her from nursery and say, today we're going to Tesco's. Where are we going? Tesco's. And the nursery nurse goes, wow, how did she do that? Well, practice, mate, that's all really absolutely simple. And she got better at segmenting words, Japanese words actually, because I was teaching some Japanese students at the time. She got so good at it, she was better than me. She was faster than me, and that's, I think, often the case. So I'm not ideological about it, but actually, I think you've got to start linking it to spellings as soon as possible. Your example, I think, is an interesting one, and that's the Pat Lindemood approach, isn't it, really? So if the kid's fixated, as they sometimes are, okay, you've got your sound spelling correspondences, you've got your lines, you're saying what's the first sound you hear, and the kid's absolutely fixated on something, then take it away and say, listen, you need to listen to what you hear and don't worry about all this stuff. So again, you see, I wouldn't be ideologically committed about this really. I mean, you use what's going to work and what's most effective, I think. As long as you know what you're doing. Yeah.
That's the thing, isn't it? Yeah. Sometimes you go, I think I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, we do ask ourselves, I mean, but it's a good idea to be sceptical all the time, isn't it? A radical scepticism, I think, is in order,
Yeah.